What would you do if you came home one day and found your front door lock changed, without your permission? No warning, no request, just a note telling you to contact the HOA for access to your own house. It sounds absurd, even illegal, but that's exactly what happened to me when I moved into Lakeside Vista, a pristine suburban community that, on the surface, promised everything I had ever wanted: a peaceful environment, friendly neighbors, and the stability of homeownership after years of renting. I had no idea that beneath the well-manicured lawns and uniform mailboxes lurked an HOA so controlling it made dictators look lenient. From the moment I arrived, I could tell the neighborhood took itself seriously. The promotional materials boasted about community spirit and impeccable order, and sure enough, every street looked like a catalog for suburban perfection. The houses had coordinated color palettes, trimmed hedges, and driveways free of oil stains or misplaced trash cans. On my first weekend, I watched as retirees sipped iced tea on their porches, parents pushed strollers along the lake's paved path, and children rode their bikes in perfect little circles around the cul-de-sac. For a while, I let myself believe I had found my ideal home. Then I met Karen Alderman. No one called her that to her face, of course. Officially, she was the vice president of the HOA, but around the neighborhood, she was simply known as Karen, the kind of person who believed in rules for the sake of rules. If a holiday wreath wasn't within the approved color scheme, she sent a warning. If a neighbor left their trash bin out an hour past collection time, she took a photo and filed a complaint. The worst part? She wasn't just following the rules. She was the rules. Armed with a clipboard and a stiff smile, she patrolled the streets like she was a sheriff in a lawless town, ready to issue citations to anyone who dared disrupt Lakeside Vista's carefully curated order. I didn't think much of her at first. I wasn't planning to cause trouble. I had no outrageous plans to paint my house neon green or park a rusted-out truck on my lawn. All I wanted was a quiet place to live, a simple, drama-free existence where I could enjoy my home without someone breathing down my neck. But Karen wasn't interested in peace. She thrived on enforcement, and it didn't take long before I found myself in her crosshairs. It started small. 2 weeks after I moved in, I installed a seahorse-shaped door knocker on my front door, a simple, tasteful accent that added a little personality to my otherwise uniform house. I didn't think it was a big deal. But within days, Karen was on my doorstep, knocking, ironically, on the very knocker she had come to condemn. With the air of a principal about to scold a wayward student, she held up a laminated section of the HOA rulebook and pointed to the passage about exterior modifications requiring prior approval. I blinked. Approval? For a door knocker? I wanted to argue, but I could see it in her eyes. This was a power play. She didn't care about the knocker itself. She wanted compliance. I swallowed my irritation and filled out the required paperwork. It felt ridiculous, but I told myself it was harmless, a small inconvenience to keep the peace. I was wrong. That was the moment Karen decided I was a problem. Over the next few months, I settled into life at Lakeside Vista, doing my best to keep my head down and avoid unnecessary entanglements with the HOA. I mowed my lawn on time, took in my trash bins promptly, and ignored the occasional warning letter that felt more like a passive-aggressive reminder than an actual violation. I wasn't looking to make waves. But Karen Alderman? She had other plans. The first sign that I hadn't escaped her radar came at an HOA meeting I attended out of curiosity. I wasn't particularly interested in community politics, but I figured it was a good way to stay informed. The meeting was the usual mix of minor neighborhood concerns, landscaping budgets, upcoming events, parking disputes, until Karen took the floor. Clipboard in hand, she launched into a 20-minute presentation on community security enhancements. At first, it seemed like she was discussing general safety, more streetlights, better neighborhood watch coordination, but then she pivoted to her real agenda: standardized front door locks. Karen argued that if every house had the same brand, style, and key system, it would not only streamline emergency response but also create a unified aesthetic that enhances property values. She spoke with the zeal of a missionary, warning of hypothetical break-ins that could have been prevented with the uniform security system. I glanced around the room, expecting to see people nodding along, but most homeowners looked skeptical. One man raised his hand, asking the obvious question: aren't we already free to choose our own locks? Karen's lips pressed together in a tight smile. Of course. But wouldn't it be better if we had a standardized, approved system? For the sake of consistency? I nearly laughed out loud. Consistency? She was talking about people's front doors as if they were mailboxes or holiday decorations. To my relief, the HOA board didn't adopt any formal mandate. Bob Hastings, the HOA president, diplomatically thanked Karen for her proposal but reminded everyone that homeowners had the right to make their own security choices. That should have been the end of it. But Karen wasn't the type to take no for an answer. Over the next few weeks, she personally distributed glossy brochures to every house, recommending a specific brand of lock. It wasn't an official rule, but the message was clear: comply, or be marked as non-compliant. Then she started the one-on-one pressure campaign. A few days after the meeting, I was retrieving my mail when I heard Karen's voice behind me. "Daniel," she said in that infuriatingly sweet yet condescending tone, "have you considered upgrading your locks yet?" I turned to see her holding one of the brochures, her expression expectant. "I appreciate the suggestion," I said, forcing a polite smile, "but my locks are already secure." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "Are you sure? We wouldn't want any incidents." I felt a flicker of unease. Was that a threat? I brushed it off and walked back inside, but something about the way she had singled me out made my skin crawl. I hadn't done anything to provoke her, yet she had zeroed in on me as a problem to be corrected. That feeling only intensified when I received an official-looking letter from the HOA Compliance Committee. I expected another trivial notice about lawn maintenance, but when I opened it, my stomach twisted. It was a fine, a $500 violation for failure to comply with HOA security standards. I read it twice, trying to make sense of it. There was no official rule requiring standardized locks. Karen's proposal had been shut down at the meeting, so how was she fining me for not following a rule that didn't exist? Fuming, I marched straight to Bob Hastings' office. He wasn't always the most assertive HOA president, but he seemed reasonable enough. When I handed him the letter, his brows furrowed in confusion. "I didn't authorize this," he muttered, flipping the page over. "So, Karen just made this up?" I asked. Bob sighed, rubbing his temples. "She doesn't have the power to fine people unilaterally. Only the board can approve financial penalties, and this wasn't even discussed. Let me handle it." He promised to get back to me, but something about his reaction told me he wasn't looking forward to challenging Karen. That night, I sat in my living room, staring at the fine notice, my irritation boiling over. This wasn't about security. It was about power. Karen wanted me to comply, and when I didn't, she fabricated a violation to punish me. I had no idea that this was only the beginning. A few days later, I left for a 2-week work trip to Europe, grateful for the chance to get away from the HOA nonsense. Before leaving, I locked my house thoroughly, double-checking every door and window. Halfway through my trip, I received a text from Rachel. "Hey, I saw Karen on your porch earlier. She had a toolbox. Are you getting maintenance done? I felt a jolt of anxiety. A toolbox? I hadn't requested any maintenance. I typed back quickly, "No, that's weird. Can you keep an eye on things for me? 2 days later, another text came through. "Your front door lock looks different." I stared at my phone, my pulse hammering. What the hell was going on? I stepped out of the airport exhausted, my body aching from hours crammed in an airplane seat. All I wanted was to get home, toss my bags in the hallway, and collapse onto my couch. But as I pulled into Lakeside Vista, something felt off. Maybe it was just my jet lag, but my house, my home, felt different, like a place I wasn't entirely sure I belonged to anymore. That unease solidified the moment I walked up my front steps and jammed my key into the lock, only for it not to fit. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I turned the key over, tried again, wiggled it, pressed harder, my mind scrambling for an explanation. But no matter what I did, the lock wouldn't budge. Because it wasn't my lock. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach as my eyes drifted lower, to a neatly taped note affixed to my door. Asterisk welcome back. For uniformed neighborhood security, your locks have been upgraded. Please contact the HOA for keys and instructions. Asterisk. The words didn't even register at first. I just stood there, gripping my useless key, my exhausted brain trying to process the sheer audacity of what I was reading. Upgraded? Upgraded? I wasn't locked out by accident. Karen had changed my locks while I was gone. A surge of anger jolted me awake more effectively than any coffee ever could. I yanked on the handle, useless, obviously, then pounded on the door, as if that would magically reverse whatever nightmare I had walked into. I turned in a slow, disbelieving circle, scanning the street. Had anyone else noticed? Were my neighbors watching from behind their pristine curtains, pretending this wasn't happening? I should have called the police, but my exhaustion made everything feel surreal. Instead, I found myself checking into a cheap motel, forced to spend my first night back in town locked out of my own home. By morning, my exhaustion had turned into full-blown rage. The second HOA office hours began, I stormed down to the clubhouse, ready to burn the place to the ground if that's what it took to get my house back. Inside, the office was eerily quiet, filled with neatly stacked pamphlets about neighborhood regulations and a fake potted plant in the corner. Behind the front desk, Karen was already there, flipping through paperwork like she had absolutely no idea what she had done. Her eyes flicked up when she saw me, and a small, tight-lipped smile formed on her face. "Ah, Daniel," she said pleasantly, like we were old friends bumping into each other at the grocery store. "I assume you saw the note about your new locks." I inhaled sharply, forcing down the urge to slam my fists onto the desk. "Why did you replace my locks without my permission?" Karen tilted her head in mock concern. "Oh, you were out of town, and your locks didn't meet the community's recommended security standard. We had to ensure compliance." "Compliance?" My voice came out sharp. With a recommendation, the board never passed a rule about uniform locks. And even if they had, you had no right to change my property while I was gone. She didn't even blink. The HOA has the authority to enforce security standards. I leaned in, my hands flat against the counter. "Where's my key?" Karen sighed, clearly irritated that I wasn't thanking her for what she'd done. "We're holding on to master copies for now. You can sign the acceptance forms, and I'll give you access." I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't just a power move, it was hostage-taking. "I'm not signing anything," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You're going to return my property now." Her smile tightened. "If you refuse to comply, you may face non-compliance penalties." That was it. I was done. "I'll be calling the locksmith. And then I'm calling a lawyer." I turned and walked out, ignoring whatever nonsense she was spewing behind me. My next stop was Vista Secure Locks, where I barely finished explaining my situation before the locksmith, Taylor Brooks, muttered, "Are you kidding me? That's illegal." By the time we got back to my house, my frustration had reached a boiling point. Taylor got to work immediately, pulling out her tools, examining the new lock Karen had installed. "Well," she said, smirking, "the good news is, it's not a high-quality lock. Shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. That was the only good news. The rest? I had been forcibly locked out of my own house by an HOA tyrant who thought she could override property rights. While Taylor worked, I pulled out my phone and opened my email. If Karen thought she could get away with this, she was dead wrong. Subject: unauthorized lock change, formal complaint. But before I could hit send, an HOA-wide email landed in my inbox. The subject made my stomach churn. Security alert, suspicious activity at the Carter residence. I opened it, my jaw clenching as I read the message. Dear Lakeside Vista residents. We regret to inform you that an individual was observed attempting to tamper with the front door of my address during the homeowner's absence. Thankfully, due to our recent security initiative, unauthorized access was prevented. This reinforces the importance of our new standardized locks to protect the community. Remember, if you have not yet upgraded your locks to the recommended brand, please do so immediately. For security concerns, contact the HOA. Stay safe. Karen Alderman, HOA Vice President. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles went white. Karen wasn't just trying to justify her actions. She was staging a fake break-in to manipulate the entire neighborhood into thinking she had done me a favor. She was gaslighting everyone. I turned to Taylor, who was in the middle of picking my own front door open. I let out a bitter laugh. Well, according to my HOA, you're breaking in. Taylor gave me a look. Your HOA's full of crap. Within minutes, the lock clicked, and my front door swung open. Relief hit me like a tidal wave as I stepped inside. Everything looked untouched, just as I had left it. But as I stood there, staring at my stolen door lock, that relief burned away into something stronger. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was rewriting reality to justify her control. She thought this was over. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I didn't waste any time. The moment my front door was secured with a new lock that only I controlled, I sat down at my desk, cracked my knuckles, and typed out the most ruthless email I had ever written. Subject: unauthorized lock change, formal complaint and demand for reimbursement. I laid out everything. The unapproved lock swap, the forced lockout, the absurd hostage situation Karen tried to pull with my key, and, most damning of all, the outright fabrication of a security threat to justify it. I attached screenshots of Karen's staged break-in email, a photo of the note she left on my door, and the locksmith's invoice for restoring my locks. Then, I CC'd every single board member. I didn't wait for a response. I knew Karen would try to stall, deflect, or twist the narrative, so I took the next step before she could breathe. I printed a copy of my complaint and marched straight to Bob Hastings' office. The HOA president looked pale as he skimmed my letter. He hadn't even finished before he muttered, "Jesus Christ, she actually did it." "So, you knew this was a possibility?" I asked, crossing my arms. Bob rubbed his forehead. I knew she was pushing the lock initiative, but I had no idea she went this far. He let out a long sigh, then met my gaze. "You have every right to demand reimbursement. The board will address this." But I wasn't finished. "And what about the fabricated break-in?" I asked, tapping the printed copy of Karen's email on his desk. Bob hesitated. "That complicates things." "Complicates things?" My voice sharpened. "She locked me out of my own house and then lied to the entire neighborhood to justify it. If the board doesn't do something about this, I will." Bob exhaled heavily, nodding. "A special board meeting will be scheduled." It didn't take long for the fallout to hit Lakeside Vista like a wrecking ball. Within an hour of my email, I got replies from multiple board members, most of them some variation of "we were unaware of this and will investigate immediately." But what mattered more was the neighborhood's reaction. Karen had built her authority on a reputation for order and control, but now, people were furious. Neighbors who had quietly endured her overreach for years were suddenly reconsidering every ridiculous rule she had enforced. Whispers turned into full-blown conversations. A group of homeowners started a chat thread specifically to discuss filing grievances against her. And then came the final straw. That evening, I got a call from Megan Porter, one of the HOA board members. "You didn't hear this from me," she said quickly, "but I have something you might want to see." 20 minutes later, I was standing outside her house as she handed me a stack of papers. "These are HOA financial records," she explained. "I pulled them after your email." I flipped through the pages, not understanding at first, until I saw it. A purchase order for standardized locks. The amount? Thousands of dollars. And right next to the expense report? Karen's signature, authorizing the transaction. My stomach twisted. Wait. She used HOA money for this? Megan nodded. And as far as I can tell, the board never approved it. This wasn't just Karen overstepping her authority anymore. This was financial misconduct. The next HOA meeting was standing room only. Karen sat at the front, arms crossed, a mask of forced calm on her face. But for the first time, she looked cornered. Bob opened the meeting, his usual diplomatic tone replaced with firm disapproval. "We're here to discuss serious allegations regarding unauthorized changes to private property and potential financial mismanagement," he announced. Then he turned to me. "Daniel, you have the floor." I didn't waste time. I laid out everything: the lock change, the key hostage situation, the faked break-in, and the financial receipts proving she had used HOA funds without board approval. By the time I finished, the room was dead silent. Then, someone spoke. "This is outrageous," a neighbor muttered. Another voice. "How many other houses did she change locks on?" Then another. "Did my HOA fees pay for this?" The pressure in the room shifted. Karen was losing control. She straightened in her seat, her voice dripping with condescension. "Everything I did was for the safety of this community. If people want to blow this out of proportion, that's on them." I scoffed. "Safety? Then why did you fake a break-in at my house?" Her jaw clenched. She had no answer. Bob cleared his throat. "Karen, the board did not authorize the lock replacements, and we certainly didn't approve using HOA funds for them. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Karen's eyes darted across the room, looking for an ally. But for the first time, she found none. Bob sighed. "The board will be taking an internal vote on whether Karen should continue serving as vice president." And just like that, her reign was crumbling. But even after all of this, she still had one last trick up her sleeve. The next morning, I got a sealed envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a check for the Locksmith invoice. And a separate contract. A typed note read, "Asterisk, by cashing this check, you acknowledge that no wrongdoing occurred and waive any future claims against the HOA or its representatives." Asterisk. I almost laughed. Even in defeat, Karen was still trying to wiggle out of consequences. I tore up the contract and deposited the check anyway. Because Karen didn't get to rewrite the rules anymore. Karen never recovered from that meeting. She managed to narrowly avoid being removed as HOA vice president, thanks to a single remaining ally on the board, but her power was effectively stripped away. She lost her position on the Community Standards Committee, which meant she could no longer dictate what homeowners could and couldn't do. She no longer had the authority to issue fines, mandate rule changes, or push her obsessive standardization efforts without full board approval. In short, Karen was reduced to nothing more than a figurehead. But that wasn't the only change. The HOA board, rattled by the sheer backlash Karen had caused, introduced a new policy, one that explicitly stated no exterior modifications could be made to any private home without the homeowner's written consent. No more shady forced alterations, no more unapproved rule enforcement, and certainly no more surprise lock changes. It seemed obvious, but Karen had proven how much wiggle room bad faith actors could exploit. The community wasn't going to let it happen again. In the weeks that followed, Lakeside Vista started to feel different. The tension that had lingered beneath the surface for so long? It eased. People who had once stayed quiet out of fear of retaliation now spoke up. Neighbors who had always grumbled in private about Karen's overreach finally had a reason to push back. The ridiculous, micromanaging rules that had turned the neighborhood into her personal fiefdom started to unravel. Suddenly, people weren't afraid to push the limits. It was almost funny, really. The more control Karen lost, the more personal touches started appearing in the neighborhood. Colorful flower pots on porches. Door knockers shaped like animals, symbols, and quirky designs. A few houses even put out garden gnomes, which I'm sure made Karen's blood pressure skyrocket. But what could she do? The rules were clear now. As for me, I found myself unexpectedly more invested in the community than ever before. I started attending HOA meetings regularly, not out of fear, but because I wanted to make sure another Karen never got the chance to pull the same stunt again. I connected with neighbors I might have never met otherwise, including Rachel and Megan, who had stood by me throughout the entire ordeal. Karen, on the other hand, she kept her head down. No more patrols with her clipboard. No more smug knocks on people's doors. She still lived in Lakeside Vista, of course, but she wasn't the queen of it anymore. Sometimes, I'd see her by the lake during community events, sipping tea and pretending she wasn't silently fuming at all the non-uniform decorations ruining her perfect vision. And as for my lock, it worked perfectly every time. Each time I turned my key, I felt that small, quiet sense of victory, a reminder that I had fought back, and won. The real question is, how many other Karens are out there, still trying to control every inch of their neighborhoods? Have you ever felt powerless against HOA tyranny or a power-hungry Karen? Share your experiences below. Let's see who had it worse.